Welcome back to the Bible Lore Podcast. We're here with another episode of Bible at the Movies. This time, we're doing Exodus, Gods and King by Ridley Scott, a movie that came out in, well, I should probably have that on up and ready.
2014.
2014, which feels late. I want to say this is a 2011 vibes movie. You know what I mean? It feels like 2011 there's this distinctive vibe shift between mid to early 2010s, and this feels like it straddles that for sure.
Or even earlier, like maybe when the first Wrath of the Titans movies came out, or not the first, the remake around that.
The remake,
like
yeah,
2008 or 9 or something. Yeah.
I was just reading Hesiod because we're coming up on the Persian period, which means the Greeks are about to really get their shit together, and all of that starts happening. And I'm a little bit disappointed because in the commentary I was reading about Hesiod, someone was like, and then Zeus releases his uncles, and I'm like, that's the tagline. It's not release the Kraken, it's release the uncles.
Yes.
Which is
are Zeus's uncles the Titans?
Yes. Yeah, so it's his.
I want to say that I'm remembering this from actually knowing Greek lore, but I believe that is the third act of Disney's Hercules.
I mean, there's so much cultural osmosis for that stuff too. It's everywhere. So we're talking about that. Welcome back to the Ale House at the End of the World. Chris Wade.
Hi.
Great to have you back. Wish it was under better movie circumstances.
I'm so happy to be here. As I've said before, Hayden, Bible Lore Podcast, one of my favorite, file under BNP for Chris Wade, best new podcasts, even though you're in your second year or so of doing it now. And we've been playing tag about putting this this recording on the books since January. So thank you for bearing with me. But because of that, I watched this movie the first time back in March and had to rewatch it again last night because I didn't remember anything. Because right off the bat, let's set the table stakes. This movie is so fucking boring.
It's so forgettable.
Yes.
Like it's very much, and I was wondering how do you feel about this, because I always see these newer Ridley Scott movies, and I'm a bit behind. Like I haven't even seen his Napoleon one. But what I always find myself with is like this feeling that there was a good script buried in there somewhere, and he had some pretty interesting ideas always, and then he just films it in the most boring way. I mean,
this one is particularly egregious. I'm probably on the more apologist end of Ridley.
Prometheus, pretty good.
Prometheus and Covenant, the later Alien stuff is really interesting and cool. I think The Martian is like a
serviceable.
I call it like that's like a movie on a plane, or like Sunday afternoon on TNT that takes 5 hours to watch with commercials. That's that kind of banger. I even liked the House of Gucci movie enough, found it enjoyable enough to watch in a theater with my mom while I was visiting her. And
that is very much a take your mom to the movies. There's nothing else on sort of deal.
And then I know that real Napoleon heads hate that Napoleon movie, but I was fine. I enjoyed seeing some Napoleonic combat put on the screen in a really serviceable way. I liked him depicting Napoleon as a weird, horny little guy.
Where was that with Moses?
Yes, exactly. This is just an interminable slog, and you can get I'm excited for you to walk me through some of the historiography here, and obviously I've listened to your series is like getting into the Exodus, but it's like for all the adaptation stuff that's like, oh, we're gonna recast Moses as like a badass general and have him doing like fight training montages where he's teaching the Hebrews to shoot arrows while hanging off the side of horses. If you're gonna amp it up to make him that, then the movie has no right being such a dreadful slog the rest of the time. At least go ahead and go all the way and make him a gritty action hero.
Well, and again, this is a movie where he basically tells them like, no, we're not attacking the military. He almost puts it in these exact terms. We're not attacking military. We're attacking the people's comfort. He goes full like fucking Osama bin Laden on them. I don't know why I keep bringing you on. I hadn't seen this movie, so I didn't know we were going to be talking about more biblical terrorism. But
yes,
like David last time, but that's how do you make that boring? Like
Yes.
Osama bin Moses is just, how do you make that such so difficult to watch at times? And we'll get into some of the fun stuff. There are a few things that
Yes.
I liked
Yes.
in this.
There's some pops.
It pops in a couple places, but it's just so long
Yeah.
and tedious.
My best guess is that he was maybe trying to do something that was pulling from those like 1950s style sword and sandal epics where it's like big and stately, and it's a lot of like bald men, like Yul Brynner types talking in front of
Yes.
flaming braziers, and it has that kind of like heavy, like mid-century version of Shakespeare style to it. But it's then also it's that, but then shot in like kinetic Ridley vision, and it just makes both sides of that seem bad and uncompelling. Yeah.
Yeah, it was the same kind of problem I had with The Counselor,
Mhm.
which I liked the script a lot for, but everything's filmed so boringly that like when you see like I watched I threw on, because it took us a while to record this, I threw on Cecil B. DeMille's 1950s Ten Commandments just to see what the like first hour
Vibe
was
is,
like,
yeah,
because
yeah.
it's 4 hours long. It is 4 hours long. And you can tell that Scott is kind of basing what he's doing a little bit on that. Like he's readapting it in Ridley Scott, in his Ridley Scott way, which means he can go a long way away from it. I mean, his Robin
Yeah.
Hood movie, say what you will about it, it looks like no other Robin Hood movie you've ever seen. He
Yes.
goes far afield from his sources, but it's not always in an interesting way. And it feels very samey. I remember I he's one of like what? Like 3 directors left who are themselves brands.
Yeah.
Like him, Michael Bay. I was at my mom's house for Christmas one year, and our neighbors invited us over for a drink. And their son is like this guy in his mid-20s. I was in my mid-20s at the time, and I'm like, "What do you do?" He's like, "I work for Ridley Scott." And I was like, "You work for Ridley Scott?" He's like, "I work on Ridley Scott VR experiences,
Okay.
like for whatever the Scott Free Productions company." I'm like, I didn't know that was a job one could have, but that kind of tells you the scale of just this guy. He is his own like mini Disney,
Yeah.
like mini Lucasfilm, mini Pixar, whatever you want to call it. Like a guy who has like a million moving parts all the time, but it's just not. It doesn't coalesce into anything interesting. Like I mean, with James Cameron, you can at least, there's a certain level he reaches, and Scott, there's so many like script mismatches that get through because he's always working. He still puts out like a movie a year.
And I'm gonna bring these up. It's not just a movie a year. These huge movies
Huge.
that are vastly different. Like even just his last run, it's like 3 movies in a row. The Last Duel, medieval knight epic, House of Gucci, 1970s,
Period
like
piece.
1970s like industrial family espionage drama, and then Napoleon, huge other period war movie,
He's
and then
like
Gladiator
82.
2. Yeah, yeah. It's
Eh,
so my thought is like, and on one hand, even if you think that uh at this point in his career, and maybe for the last 2 decades, he's been midly Scott, to
I
put it lightly. You do kind of have to, as I think we're give him credit for being able to work that consistently at that high of a level. And maybe he's a little on autopilot, that he's just done these things so many times that he just like kind of turns to his team and being like, yeah, it's Napoleon, it's 19th century, we know what this looks like, just slap it together, you know, fire up the costume machine, fire up the horse renting guys, we'll just churn through it.
his voice still comes through here though, which is
Yeah.
very interesting because Moses in this is cast essentially as Ridley Scott, an atheist, like
Yes.
a British atheist in from the modern day, but he happens to be in the Pharaoh's court,
Yes.
um, and he tries to historicize everything, which again is very fascinating. But we'll get into it. So you all know the Moses story. He's thrown down the river in the basket, his little Noah's Ark, mini Noah's Ark. He's picked up by an Egyptian who, a high Egyptian court official. I think I want to say it's like the daughter of Pharaoh in the Ten Commandments, and they're like a lot of these things. A lot of these adaptations are based heavily on Jewish tradition, both from like the Talmud, the Mishnah, the commentaries on the Exodus that Jewish folks wrote in the late antique period, so like first, second century, and also things like Josephus and Philo, both who lived in the first century CE. They wrote like their own narratives of Moses, probably often incorporating their own views, like their own understandings of the history, but also reflecting like contemporary Jewish tradition about that. And some of those traditions might be quite old. So like,
because I'm going to guess that, the actual texts does not say the name Batithia, daughter of Moses,
Yeah.
daughter of Pharaoh, found
No.
the reed basket.
No, Moses's mom is mentioned once, and she's basically like not a character in it, and it's most likely that like the birth narrative was added pretty late. Like the whole little story with the basket was a pretty late addition to the narrative, because you had to like tie it back, and there like it was an independent story, right? The Moses stories were on their own for a long time. One of the weird things,
and this is the thing that we specifically have talked about when I've talked to you on this podcast, that I find so fascinating, is how clearly, with a little bit of historiography or historiographical training, even as an amateur like myself, that you can see that these texts are woven together from several independent like literary and story traditions with a very like didactic purpose behind combining a few different things.
Exactly. And often those things are in kind of conflict with each other, right? They have different perspectives. One of the interesting parts, though, is that even like little lost tidbits can still affect things. So the like Moses in this is a military commander.
Yes.
And that's a fairly early tradition. Josephus mentions it. There's a guy called Artapanus who mentions it. We don't have Artapanus's writings. His writings come to us, and this is how these things always go.
Yes.
His writings are mentioned by Eusebius and Clement, so first or second and fourth century authors.
Yes.
But they are mentioning summaries of Artapanus's work by Alexander Polyhistor, who lived in the first century BCE and wrote summaries of Artapanus's works from century. So you're getting
so
this,
our most primary source is a third degree separation from the original text.
Right. But in this, like you get this tradition where, so at one point in the story, it mentions like after the Exodus, after this is all happening, Aaron and Miriam, Moses' sister, brother and sister, they get mad at Moses, and it makes no sense. They're like, it says, because of the Cushite woman he was with. Now, Cushite means like Sudan, Ethiopia. Yes. So you're like, where did that come from? Like, there was never any mention of this. Now, what actually probably happened is that it was likely that Cush was an alternate name for Midian, where Zipporah, Moses' wife in this, is from, like in northwest Saudi Arabia, probably. But because that name was lost to time, because it was some tiny out of the way little spot that eventually was, not called Cush anymore, but they found like an inscription that listed that as among the tribes that lived there. But because later people didn't know that, they were like, oh, he must have married someone from Cush. Well, what that ends up with is Moses under Pharaoh, or maybe independently, as a military commander who leads an expedition into Ethiopia. And that's what you find in like Josephus and in these descriptions from Artapanus. So it's actually a very old tradition, probably pretty parallel to when the Pentateuch was like compiled or just after it. So it's a very like this very old way of like fixing the text, I guess, because they didn't quite understand it. And so Moses becomes this military commander. Now that's almost taken as like a a given. Like every adaptation will take that into account.
Well, it
Uh,
certainly makes for a neat narrative at the
mm,
beginning here, because in
yes,
this movie, we start off with Ramses and Moses as, uh, essentially, accepted as brothers,
right.
you know,
Similar to the Ten Commandments, where
yes.
except like in the Ten Commandments, there's this whole uh, like the Pharaoh in that is like, actually, I might just make Moses the Pharaoh sort of
And you have
thing.
that like a glimpse of that scene
Just
at
a
the beginning here where old
Yeah,
Pharaoh,
John
John
Turturro,
Turturro,
so good.
yes,
Don't know that he
uh,
belongs here, but it's
yeah,
so good.
yes. The smattering of, like, white ethnics,
It's
as our various, Egyptians here is very funny.
yeah,
But you do get the one little scene at the beginning that's like, you're where John Turturro's like, "You're clearly better at this than Ramses. I really wish I could just make you next pharaoh, but
yeah.
sadly, that's not how our lineages work.
I
Too bad."
I feel like that's like I almost want a sort of John C. Riley, Adam McKay, Dewey Cox type version of
Yeah.
this. Like I covered whatever it's called, Les du Jure, whatever with Max Palma, and I wish there was an updated version of that, because there are so many like little bits like that where you're like, this is so like cliched at this point. Everything's so cliched that it just smacks
Yeah.
you in the face with it
Which I guess
repeatedly.
is hard to do if you're not do a cliched adaptation if you're adapting the Bible.
Yeah.
It's like where 50% of our cliches, you're basically 50% the Bible, 50% Shakespeare.
Absolutely. And
You
what I
got
think,
you kind of got to paint in broad strokes.
which I almost wish Scott would have done.
Yeah.
Like that's the part where I'm like, because of that, it feels like it like spits that back in your face a little bit.
Yes.
So they get ready to go to battle, and and there's a prophecy foretold through entrail omens, which
Yes.
again, kind of an odd one. Like there's so much stuff in this that they're obviously trying to be quote unquote historically accurate, historicizing. The Egyptians, not really extispicy folks. Like they didn't
Okay.
really, they were actually one of the only places that didn't do entrail reading as like a prominent focus, which is kind of interesting. Still, I love seeing it on the screen. Whatever.
Yeah.
Give our haruspicists their due. Um,
Yes. We do have like the hot all like I love that she has like the mohawk hairdo lady
yeah,
priest who's looking at the gizzard and saying,
yeah,
something's gonna go down with the next pharaoh and being saved and saving."
yeah, and it's fine. It's pretty good. They go out to battle, and it's the battle of, what is it? The Battle of Kadesh. So they like that's the prophecy's told. They go out to Ramses and Moses lead their troops into battle. Now that is a real battle between the Egyptian forces and the Hittites over control of the Levant. It's one of the first battles. I thought that it was the first. It's the first pitched battle that we have record of, though there was an earlier one from the beginning of New Kingdom Egypt, like 300 years prior, that's
Mhm.
described, but it's a little bit different. This one, like the description is like Ramses runs up and he's losing, and then his reinforcements arrive, and it's a rout. It probably wasn't a rout. It was probably kind of they kind of fought to a standstill, and both were in a strategic retreat.
Yes.
Um, but
This is what I would say is a nice pop from the first of this movie. I do enjoy seeing the depiction of chariot battle at this scale, with this kind of visual technology. It would suck to get run over by a chariot,
oh,
and this movie makes it very explicit that that is the case.
and the little glimpses of like the butcher beforehand, and like the whole like
Yeah.
they're dealing with all this meat, and they're like it does have a little bit of texture to it. It
Yeah, it shows like that the Hittite camp is more than just like a bunch of guys sitting around with
Yep.
shields, that these camps would be whole mobile villages, that they would
Yeah.
have like attendant families and people like the butcher and stuff. It gives you a sense of battle world in a way that I have to give Ridley a little bit of credit for, of having, going a little deeper than just a line of guys with with pikes and shields.
Right, a little bit more than he did like with Gladiator and the
Yeah.
Barbarians and all of
Yes,
that,
exactly.
which is more what you're used to seeing. But one of the I thought it was interesting. A bunch of the Hittites are black,
Mhm.
uh, which I thought was weird because they're from Anatolia. I mean, they're Turkish. I was like, why are they darker than the Egyptians? Who like that was
Yes.
the ethnic kind of presentation of this movie is really like I, I know people found it offensive at the time. Whatever, it was like at the height of talking about whitewashing in Hollywood. It's just kind of bizarre
Yeah,
at
it's all
points.
over the place.
It's really weird. What
Well,
I
one might even make a claim that this is like kind of colorblind casting,
yeah,
given like you know the amount of different type of people. I mean, who is going to be the most offended that you have like Aaron Paul playing one of the prominent Hebrews towards the end of this movie?
that was a tough one. That is a tough one. He didn't belong there. Come on,
No, I mean
don't
they
put
were
him in
still
there.
they were really trying to figure out what to do with him after Breaking Bad.
Let him be in Need for Speed. Need for Speed was fun.
Yeah, that's
Kid
yes.
Cudi's in it. Well, what I really wanted was like them to like challenge the Egyptians to like one-on-one combat, like and then the guy comes up and it's just him, it's one of the ice cream vendors from Turkey who's like
Oh
always
yes,
got the
yes,
cups
yes.
like, oh, if you can take the ice cream you win the battle.
Yes. Yes, and he's like, they cast like a 10-foot tall guy, and he's in like really ornate bronze armor from head to toe, and you can't even see his eyes.
He's just
He's
got a
just
little
on sheaths,
fez.
so you think it's gonna be a long sword, but as he finishes it, it's just like a 10-foot long pole with a tiny little scoop at the end of it.
Yes. So Moses saves Ramses and fulfills the prophecy of like he's going to be a great leader, but then the prophecy is also like the other one is going to be a leader too.
Yeah.
And it's fine. So Moses gets tasked by Pharaoh though to go deal with the Pithom problem. So he's got their Hebrew slaves in Pithom who are not working well enough, and this is where you get one of those little casting coups because the viceroy of Pithom is Ben fucking Mendelsohn.
Yes,
And
we love Ben Mendelsohn, and especially love him playing a sniveling little like officiant weasel.
he's basically doing like a trial run for his role in Andor and Rogue One.
Yes, exactly.
It's a very similar type of character, which kind of throws in. And again, this is also about terrorists, where he's like one of the main guys fighting against the terrorists. It feels like a trial run for that in a much worse production.
Yes, this is also where we see one of my least favorite the first of my least favorite technical choices here, which is the awful day for night shooting that they
Yeah.
do, where he just like dumps this like royal blue filter over anything that's supposed to be happening at night. And I find it really like I know day for night is a very accepted thing. And again, maybe this is him trying to ape some of those like 1950s styles in this, but I find it just looks so cheap and distracting. And he does it so many times in this
So
movie.
much where you're just like, that's clearly like this. And this is not a movie that tries to be stylized. Like,
Yeah.
this came out the year before Fury Road, which was like rightly lauded for
Yes.
all of those day for night scenes that were filmed with like extreme effect, because
Yeah.
the way that it was done was just so beautiful and fit in with the like visual aesthetic of the movie. And like,
But
this is not that.
Yeah, just now when I'm thinking, like, I enjoy Ben Mendelsohn's performance in this, but when I'm like thinking about him, and I just watched this yesterday, his skin is blue in my mind in this
It's
movie.
blue. He's
Yeah.
looking like Dr. Manhattan.
Yes, exactly. Because he's like almost every one of his scenes is in this that style. But it's great, and he's chewing some scenery, and he's being a dismissive prick to all of his lowers.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I just think of that Auntie Donna sketch or the podcast where they're like, "Hey, Darth Vader, how you going, mate?" Like,
Yes.
You're not going to talk to the fucking cops, are you? Hey, Moses, you're not going to talk to the fucking Pharaoh, are you? It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
So the viceroy claims Israel means he who fights with God. Moses
Yes.
counters that it's he who wrestles with God.
Yes.
And that is like there are so many little like nuggets in this movie, and those are like kind of two etiologies, I guess, or etymological etiologies. Really, it means like God fights for us, or El fights for us, is kind of probably the original translation, or
Mhm.
the original meaning, or close to it.
El El's our guy.
El's our guy. That's like half of all ancient Middle Eastern names is,
Yes.
um, and that's and so Moses goes down to visit them, and he wants to go see them face to face. It's really interesting. I think Moses in this movie, this feels weirdly enough, because it feels so impersonal. It feels like it was made by nobody, but still, it feels like Moses is the Ridley Scott insert character, like very much of like this entire movie feels like he's posed a question to himself of like, what would it take for me to believe in God?
Yeah, and I guess, like, on that, another reason that this feels so weird that this is 2014 and not, like, 2008 is it feels very strange seeing Bale do something this, like, generic
Yeah.
after all the Dark Knight cycle where he could kind of do whatever he wanted, and instead he's doing, like,
Terminator Genesis or no,
and
Terminator
Salvation?
Salvation, and then this.
Yeah, 'cause as you're saying, the characterization of Moses in this is not even after that scene, one who wrestles with God is that I guess he has some scenes where they do some of that, but it very much is like guy who winds up in authority position and then kind of growls at people.
Yeah, he yells a lot. He does a
Yeah.
lot of yelling. I don't know what direction, because not all of the lines that he yells even feel like they were meant to be
Yeah.
yelled. Where you're like, did they have a different take of this, but they liked the one where he's screaming?
Yeah.
Like, it's really anyway. So
Yeah.
Moses goes and visits the Hebrew people, and he ends up in another one of those great, we'll call him ethnic utility player. Joshua's father, Nun, who is not really a character in the Bible, but he's like one of the elders here, played by Ben Mendelsohn.
Or Ben Kingsley.
Or Ben Kingsley, not Ben Mendelsohn.
Sir Ben Kingsley.
Sir Ben Kingsley, sorry.
Yes, of course.
Yes, who we all love. It feels like something that they would have talked about on like Sopranos, like in
Yeah.
the episodes where Ben Kingsley's part of it, where you're like, you know, he's like, oh yes, I'm doing this Exodus movie with Ridley Scott. Sort of like, you're like, is this a joke? Am I being pranked here?
Yeah. And this whole scene, like basically like he meets with Ben Kingsley and the Jewish people, and this whole scene is essentially that one Nick Mullen clip about being Chinese, where just Ben Kingslly goes, "You're Jewish," and
You're
and
Jewish.
yes, and Moses immediately converts it. Like he basically like there's very little dramatic wrestling here. Moses like basically goes back to the after this one night meeting in a mud hut with a
He's
bunch of
so
Ben
mad
Kingsley and
about
his
it.
guys.
He gets so mad
Yeah.
that they told him that he's a Hebrew, and he
Yeah.
just like he immediately loses his mind and kills two people.
Yes.
Like it's not the killing of two people in the Bible's version and in most adaptations is because of mistreatment, which you'd think with how much of this movie is about like the mistreatment of the slaves and the bad treatment of you'd think that they would work that in. It's like, no. It's just because he got really pissed off. And
Yeah.
that is the part where I'm like, if this is a Ridley Scott insert character, like Russell Crowe in Robin Hood, like all of these others, is that like how he sees himself as just a guy who gets pissed off all the time and starts yelling at like what is this? What are we doing with this?
I mean, maybe that's how he would imagine. I mean, and these are the questions that I want to ask you later about dealing with this narrative. Where if you were a guy like Ridley Scott, old, ornery, very much product of 20th century Britain atheist, and you get over the course of like, I don't know, a few months, slowly get told, not only is God undeniably real, you happen to be his number one guy, and you have to do all of his bidding.
Yeah, that is an interesting, like, that is kind of the interesting part where I you do see that, like, that's in the
Yeah.
biblical text, right? Like there are parts of that where Moses is, that is one of his main characterizations, is as this
Yes.
guy who's sort of put upon, who doesn't necessarily want to do this,
Yeah. The
and
the
who
uh the I wasn't even supposed to be here today of religious leaders.
exactly. And I feel like this is the most boring way, the most boring Ridley Scott way you could deal with that is like, well, what would I do? I'd get really fucking pissed and I'd do really
Yeah.
badass shit. And you're like, oh, well, couldn't we be a little bit more introspective?
Yes.
But so he kills these people. Ramses becomes pharaoh. R.I.P. John Turturro. I barely remember him in this, which
Yes.
is he gets leeches on his arm. I don't know if they did leeches back then.
There is one other little moment that got a chuckle out of me after the chariot, the Battle of Kadesh, where they have the scribe in the room who's like writing the
Yeah, yeah,
hieroglyphic summary of the
yeah.
battle, and they're all like kind of group editing what exactly happened to make it look the best.
Which
I thought that was kind of funny.
that is kind of fun, and again, it probably not wrong. Like the way that
Yes.
like it's probably closer to the truth than a lot of
Yes.
like they're
Just being the scribe and having to constantly look back over
like
your shoulder and being like, and did Ramses slay 2 dozen Hittites, or are we going to say 3?
yeah. And he's like looking back and turning up a dial that says "kill
Yeah,
dead
like,
Hittites," and
yes, exactly.
it's
We want to make it plausible, but it should still sound heroic.
we
So
still
let's go with like,
won
yeah,
this, right? We
yeah,
still won. I thought that was pretty fun too.
yeah.
That was pretty good. So the big
And as you
confrontation.
say, it is to the Ridley's touch throughout, where he wants to make this all feel like a very real and grounded society, even as like the biblicalness of it intrudes more and more onto the depicted as incredibly bureaucratic and rational Egyptians.
Yeah, and he gets the scale right, like technically, like everything
Mhm.
looks really big, and he does
Yes.
these big kind of overhead establishing shots with like some which look okay, a lot of them don't. Like they're so
Yeah, I mean,
instantly.
it's a little CGI goop from the like 2014 era. I also agree that I thought that some of the city design, I thought, from my knowledge of these things, felt again plausible. Where
Yeah,
it's like, it's not like a 10 million person like version of ancient Memphis, but it's like, okay, okay, yes, there would be a huge temple complex,
yeah,
and the Pharaoh's palace, and then these sprawling cities that are like mostly some like brick buildings and a lot of like more improvised structures,
yeah,
but it would be a fairly large urban area that had like systems to support a decent like you get that from his design, which I also
yeah.
appreciate about some of this stuff.
It feels like it feels very late Bronze Age globalized economy, which I
Yes.
think is to his credit. Unfortunately, because you've established this thing that feels kind of like it could be real, it just calls out more when
Yes.
things like are so odd and like don't really, I don't know, don't really track. Um, so Ramses becomes the pharaoh, and I guess we could talk about him here. That's played by Joel Edgerton, who
Yes.
I'm torn on. I feel like he's one of those actors who I really like, but who's often cast in these roles where I'm like, I wasn't really a Joel Edgerton.
Yeah, he's fair. I also agree. I like Joel Edgerton in some stuff, but he feels fairly anonymous here, doing like a both a visual and performance approximation of, again, Yul Brynner
Yul
or something.
Brynner, yeah,
He's
very
like,
much so.
yeah,
And this is where I almost wish there was a little bit more of that Shakespearean oomph, like in like the coronation scene. It's almost like a montage, but there's no interest in like what it means. Like there's no interest in those scenes of what this means to the event.
Right.
It's just like, okay, well, check the boxes, check the boxes. He
Yes.
becomes Pharaoh. We're pushing the plot along. Um, so after he becomes Pharaoh, he finds out about what Moses did, killed those two Egyptian guards who harassed him. That's when he's like accused. Ramses threatens to cut off his sister's arm.
Yes.
And his mother
Sigourney
comes.
Weaver is there for
Yeah,
some reason.
Sigourney Weaver is Pharaoh's mom, and she's like kind of, again, she's like the real big bad behind the big bad, but she's like, she disappears. Like
She's so barely it's so much Sigourney Weaver, and she's so barely in this that it is very distracting whenever she's on screen. I just like
yes.
I wrote down, why is Sigourney Weaver here?
Why is it like it's clearly you could have collapsed that into Ramses. It would have been
Yes.
fine.
Yeah.
And that's the one.
Is there any tradition about Ramses' mother that this draws from, or is this just we need a place to put Sigourney in?
No, I think it's somewhat drawing on like other motifs, like Potiphar in the Joseph story. You know, the Egyptian administrator's wife who tries to seduce Joseph, but she's much more like evil than that. I really don't know where this came from. Maybe there's
Yeah.
something I've missed, and she is like a more significant character.
It
But
honestly really seems like Ridley and Sigourney were like catching up over the phone. And he
Oh,
was like,
that's yeah.
you should come down to the Exodus set. We can find a part for you."
Yeah. Well, and then like she's kind of contrasted a little bit with another woman who's kind of barely in this, but who is one of the only like I guess ethnically correct castings, which is Hayam
Yes.
Abbas, who's Palestinian, who plays Moses' mother. In this, it's Bithiah, who's in the I think in most traditions is the woman who finds or like a Hebrew woman who takes care of Moses, whereas usually Moses' mother in later traditions is called Jochebed. I don't care about that. Whatever. That's just a little oddity there where I'm like, they kind of merged these two characters, which is fine.
This whole scene is very funny. Like I get the impulse to be like, hey, let's examine the women of this world, but it very much is like Ramses tries to maim this one woman, and then it's like, but wait, let's get a second woman's perspective. And just when you're waiting, and just when you thought that was enough, we bring out the third
Woman.
it's just like, yeah, and it's this one scene where we have these three women talking about like what's going on in the plot, and then we basically don't see any of them again, and certainly don't see any of them interacting with each other again.
No, they're all there to give like little tiny encouragements to Moses, like to
Yes.
be like, oh Moses, you or to like be a slight foil to him. They don't really
Yeah.
they don't really exist.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the main administrators is a guy named Ken Bones. That's just a little note I had. His name is Ken Bones, plural. So we've got multiple Ken Boneses here.
Yes.
And I thought I had that note down, and I figured I had to say that. So Moses fucks off. He flees he flees across the Sinai to Midian, and like they set up the eventual Red Sea crossing here. And they do it kind of in an interesting way. Like when he goes there, they don't really show like a map. It's no cool Indiana Jones like drawing
the dotted
animation.
follow the dotted line. Yeah.
But he eventually makes his way almost to the southernmost point of the Sinai, where there is a small strait that leads across, that you can go across to kind of where a lot of people locate Mount Sinai or Mount Horeb, Jabal Allah in northwest Saudi Arabia, and where a lot of people locate Midian. So they kind of give you a little teaser that that's where the Red Sea crossing is eventually going to take place. You're thinking like, oh, it's going to be at the strait there. It's going to be kind of the historicizing thing, which I thought was one of the more. It's not emphasized very well, and everything's filmed in such a like for something so long and boring. It's also kind of like just like really goes and like Moses draws a map of the area when he's there. You're like, I don't know. It felt very confusing, and it was only on the second time that I saw what they were doing, because I think the first time I barely saw that he went to the strait in the southeast.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't track any of this, especially
No.
because like Moses' motivation at this point is being like, Yeah, shit's getting too complicated back in Memphis, so I'm gonna go just I don't know, I'll herd sheep. That's
Yeah.
fine. I don't want any part of this.
It's
And so you're
funny.
like,
He's not actually
yeah,
like chased off. He just kind of
no,
says, "I'm taking my ball and going home. This
fuck
is
this
too
shit,
much
I'm out.
family drama.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
gotta avoid this toxic."
This is all getting a little too messy.
Yeah,
Too
exactly.
messy for me. I just wanna wander and live.
So
Give
he
me a handful of sheep and I'll be fine.
yeah, exactly. He ends up he like in the biblical narrative, he spots a hot lady at the well, like at a watering their herds, and it's Zipporah who he's gonna marry, and yeah, that's fine.
I mean, they do like a whole little him integrating himself and ingratiating himself into this, wandering tribe of, again, sheep herds and having this like light romance. And my eyes are maximally glazed at this point. This is like, again, this is all just like flowing completely through me. Nothing is sticking during this part. And I know that they have to like set up that he has some relation with these people and with this woman and to give some kind of turn to things, but it's like this is just nothing.
It's hard to do the in the wilderness subplot really
Yeah.
well. Like you think about like The Godfather, he goes
Mhm.
off, after the murder, he goes off to Sicily, or you think of like the other end of the spectrum, Elvis, where his time in LA is probably the more boring part of that movie, which is by
He has to
necessity.
sing the Santa song. He has to sing the Santa song.
Oh
I
God.
love, the Baz Luhrmann
It's
Elvis
pretty
movies, so
good.
yeah.
I watched it after I listened to your and Molly's episode on it, and I was like, you know what, this fucking actually pretty well goes. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. At least it's kinetic and exciting. I
yes,
would love to see Baz Luhrmann's Exodus.
that's what I'm fucking talking about. Like
Yeah.
Baz Luhrmann needs to do biblical epic type stuff. He
Yeah,
would be
and
so
like he
good.
can, yes, and he can paint, like he can do hyper kinetic, like kind of throw accuracy out the window because we would just want to paint with big emotions and tell the center of the story, and we're gonna go like, everything's maximalist and gaudy. And I do think that he even in stuff like Great Gatsby, which I know also people dislike of his, but I think like all of the huge gaudy production around the Gatsby parties is very story appropriate. And I think that kind of style of portraying, like, I don't know, say the decadence of a Ramsesian court versus and somebody who is expelled from it and has to embrace this kind of austere, uh you know covenant-based faith
Oh,
to then overthrow, like, there's something there that I think Boz could get into.
yeah, and there'd be it'd at least be a lot more sexy, like
Yeah.
this is like the least sexy movie I think that has ever
Yes.
been produced.
And
Like
whenever they're out of the court, it's very much like, you know, war, like Iraq war era, Middle Eastern, like, mud hut, gray,
it's
brown and
It's a very
grays.
austere movie. Like that
Exactly.
it's a very severe and austere movie.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of life in it. So Moses eventually wanders up the mountain next to where they herd their goats, after being told, well, that's where God lives. And this was one of the scenes that I thought was like, finally, there's some oomph to this.
There's something here. Yeah.
He
I
chases
agree.
a lost sheep up this hill, and it's in the middle of this raging storm, and suddenly like a mudslide happens, and he's buried up to his mouth, and his face is the only thing uncovered. And that, like, there's these striking scenes in this where you're like, man, he's still got something to it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and seeing that visual of just like Bale's face ringed, like completely ringed in mud, as you have the bush burning in blue, and then we see that for his first interaction with God, who is played by a shitty, petulant little child, which I think we can talk about more as a interesting depiction of what's going on here.
Oh, I
Yeah,
mean, as the theophany, that is, I think, says a lot. Again,
yeah,
this is probably the most interesting part of the movie, at least to
yes,
examine for me, is that's like God, who is here represented by, so the kid's called Malak. which
Yeah.
is messenger. It's the same word as angel. Like the
Yeah.
angel is the translation of Malak, angelos in Greek, angelos, and then that becomes angels.
Yes.
Um, and he appears as this child who is again kind of again gets some of the more interesting, I don't know, philosophical elements to it, in that he disappears for long stretches, upsetting Moses. He's not always
Yes.
available. um but he tells Moses he needs a military commander. He doesn't
Yes.
need anything else. He needs someone who's willing to do what's necessary.
Yeah.
And
And very explicitly, like as the thermals say, I might need you to kill.
yeah, I
Like it's very much a god that's like, I need you to destroy on my behalf,
yeah,
in this realm. And that is, yeah, I agree that this is if there is something interesting in here, this whole scene, like, maybe you could do a seventh seal type thing where this whole thing plays out over the course of like 30 minutes or whatever,
that would be
and there might
way
be
better.
something interesting here. Yeah. If we're going to have a boring conversation based Exodus, then just go all the way and make like a trippy, like a still but trippy sequence of Christian Bale encased in pure mud talking to the vengeful child god as a bush burns in blue behind him. At least there's something there. Yeah.
It needed a little bit of spark. So
Yeah.
he basically tells him that Moses survives barely, uh, and Moses begins his preparations to return to Egypt.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so one of the weird things though with that is, like, everyone's talking about gods in this movie. This is like the real God who shows up.
Yes.
Uh, but like, is Jethro, who's like a priest, is he like worshiping? Like, there's no understanding of like what the relationship is with that, and it's but that kind of was weird to me. Um, I did like that God fucks with Moses immediately though.
Mhm.
Like he goes home, he's finally feeling better again, and you're like, okay, he's probably gonna go start to head back to Egypt, and he goes out to see his son, and then he notices like the kid is building a little pyramid like Malak did
Yes.
when he was talking to him. He's like, what is that? Why is that? And then the kid turns around and it's the angel's face, and you're like,
Yes.
I think that would have hit better if you'd seen Moses' son face more than once
Yeah.
beforehand.
I mean, yeah, I barely tracked this as well. Like,
Yeah.
things things float in and out of this movie with so little significance, unless you literally have a burning blue bush on screen, that it's like kind of hard to pick up on some of these things.
The second time I watched it, so I watched it last night as just kind of in the background while I was playing Hades or whatever. I was like, this is actually a pretty fun little like horror scene. Like you can
Yeah.
tell Scott wants to freak you out a little bit.
And that is where, like, maybe there is something more here of delving into this person who was, raised among the bureaucratic religion of of
Yeah.
the of the Egyptians, having to confront like a different god is real, and he's pissed at the gods you were raised with, and you have to go back and fight them for him,
Yeah.
and like confronting all of these things. But it's, we don't we get Bale processing this through the mind of a military general who just like transferred commands, basically.
Right, and like when Moses and Aaron show up back in the Bible, they immediately get into a duel with the magicians of Egypt, like it's a contest between gods, sort of thing. And here, Moses just sneaks back into Memphis and like immediately just threatens Pharaoh with a sword, like a short sword, like puts a sword
Yeah,
to
they've
his
got
neck.
the
He's like,
Pharaoh and Moses have these like matching complementary swords that are a big like visual motif
yeah,
of, oh, we're linked through our swords and upbringing.
which it's kind of there. It's like one of those things where he throws so much out that like that comes to play later, but you don't care. Like you don't give
Mhm.
a shit about that. It's
I
so
do like I do like the little interaction that they have where it's, again, talking about the bureaucracy and officiousness of this, where Moses says, you need to either free the slaves or you can start paying them.
yeah.
To which I don't know if it's Ramses or Ben Mendelsohn who is there, who just says, from an economic
Yeah.
standpoint alone, what you're asking is problematic, to say the least.
It's Ramses. Like, he's the one who's
Yeah.
like, okay, let's talk through this. This is going to
Yeah.
take years to pull off. Our economy is built on slaves. I don't think you understand. We have to do this, and it's
Yes, you want me to break out the ledgers of our grain surplus this year?
Yeah.
Because it's just not going to work.
and I did appreciate like that part of it. Again, there's just a little bit of that where you're like, I mean, he's kind of got a point. Like, the whole thing is kind of built on slavery,
Yeah.
or poor treatment of workers at the very least.
Yes.
And he like so he then trains them because Pharaoh says, nah, probably not going to happen. But, and Pharaoh's like, it wasn't me that tried to send those assassins to kill you. It was my mom. And I think that's kind of one of the last gasps of Sigourney Weaver's relevance in this movie.
Yes.
Is getting blamed for the assassins. Moses ends up, he whips all the Hebrews into fighting shape. There's a training montage that is so bad. It's so, because you're like, they're going to need thousands of guys, and it's Moses. Like, this is one of the weird things where like the scale of the establishing shots and like some of the big scenes clashes with the way that he films some of these things that are trying to show Moses, where it's like Moses training like one guy at a time. Here's how you, or like three guys. And it's like, this is going to take 2 decades at this rate. Like, you're,
Yes, we've got 4 guys shooting at 3 dummies with arrows.
Yeah, it's so good. So,
and there's also, and then at the same time, the plagues are starting, and
yeah, because God is like, God says this is going to take too long. I'm going to step in. I'm going to do something. Right.
Yes. And we could talk about the way the plagues are depicted, but I would say my big critique of this is that it's really a speed run of this whole thing. Like, the whole plague sequence takes about 15 minutes total.
Yeah, and it's weird because, again, it's everything it feels so long, and yet everything is so truncated and like skipped over, where you're, and like,
especially anything cool.
Yes, you get like 10 seconds of this gator scene of these gators just owning guy after guy. A gator bites a guy, and then a gator bites that gator. You're just like, exactly. This fucking rips.
Yeah, and that's the first that you see of this thing is basically these and I have to correct you. I believe in the Nile they have crocodiles.
Damn it.
Yes. This swarm of crocodiles like taking over the Nile. That is pretty gnarly and fun to watch.
And I think this was PG-13, which they get away with Ridley Scott insider stuff, because I'm pretty sure this was PG-13. There is so much like pretty good ownage in this for that era, where you're like, you almost wish they would have made it R-rated, and let him really off the leash a bit. The rest of the plagues are fine. Like the frog one is pretty good. This is where I get to bring out a little nugget. The frogs show up and they get in everything, and they're like, there are little details in the descriptions of the plagues in Exodus where it's like, and there are frogs inside of the bowls, the kneading bowls, and there's like a kind of a connection there between like impurity. It's essentially an impure animal touching pure things like food, rendering it unacceptable to eat, which is a very like Hebrew thing. I don't know that they have the same purity laws or purity traditions in Egypt. Same thing with the blood. The plague of blood is like, it mentions it coming out of the statues and like touching basically rendering their own gods impure, which is like, again, a very, it's kind of one of those details where you're like, oh, sure. One of the more fun details, though, is that the plague of frogs in Exodus, there is a typo, basically a grammatical fuck up by some scribe that gets, and I love this. These are the best parts. So there are a few of these in the Bible. One of them is a trans fish in Jonah. The fish becomes a woman, briefly, and then becomes a man again. Like it's a female and then it's male. In the frogs, though, it's initially described as a plague of frog. There's one like just singular frog, and so you get these rabbinical commentaries because for them, for the rabbis in the Mishnah in the Talmuds, like their commentaries, those are not things that you can say, well, someone made a mistake. You can't have that, and so one of them resolves this, and they always argue with each other, like, and they're responding like 50 years later, writing. And one of them
Yeah.
says it was one giant frog that came up and spawned all of the other frogs, and that's
Sure.
what I want. I want someone to take that seriously, have the kaiju frog come out, like just wreck parts of Memphis, and then just explode into a million other frogs.
Yeah, there are those frogs that carry all their young frogs on their back, and I think that
Oh,
that's a good way you could do this. And I do
yes.
so I the one interesting choice that this movie makes is fighting with this rationalization throughout this entire first suite of plagues. And I do find this somewhat interesting, even if it is again like kind of zipped through
It mirrors
because
the biblical version where
it's both in
they try to like reproduce it with their
yeah.
gods, but here they try to reproduce it naturally, like,
Yes.
which is so interesting.
It's both how it's depicted in the movie, and then how you literally have a scene where like a court, I don't know, whatever you would call it, alchemist,
Yeah,
scientist, advisor is trying to explain this, where it's like, okay, well, the crocodiles show up in the Nile, and then they eat all the fish, and that causes all the blood, and that causes the plague of blood. And then from the Nile being tainted by blood, well, of course, all the frogs that live in the Nile, they want to escape the Nile and they come on ground, and that's how they invade Memphis. And then they die because they're not in the water anymore, and that's where you get the maggot infestation, and then eventually the plague of flies. Um, it kind of goes on from there, and you have a scene of somebody like rationalizing how these things could happen. My question for you, Hayden, is you are uh, the Pharaoh of Egypt. At which point do you tap out and say, "Okay, Hebrew God is real, and I got to start adjusting policy to deal with this"?
I mean, look, if it's the crocodiles, I'm not probably going near the water, so I'm probably like, well, it could be a natural thing.
Sometimes they're more crocodiles than others.
Once the blood is in your like water in your cisterns, like the second, like I'm out. I'm out. I can't like blood. Blood gets me.
I think I can rationalize it and try to again, if you're trying to keep on a power structure until the death of the livestock, and
Yeah.
then at that point, the mass livestock die out. I think I'm like, all right, I got to go find Moses and start negotiating with God.
And that's one of the interesting things is that that actually happens kind of twice. Like the
Mhm.
livestock are all killed, and then there are livestock that get killed again, which is one of those funny things that like goofy apologists will be like, "Oh, here's how you resolve that contradiction." It's like it says they all died, all of them died. It says that like 3 times. It explicitly says all the livestock died, and then you get livestock like 2 verses later. And one of the interesting things about like the narrative here is that there is an argument to be made as to the plagues are likely a somewhat late addition to the narrative.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this. Like, do we understand the plagues to come from a single tradition, or is this another like the entirety of this suite of disasters cobbled together
It,
from different
it's
things?
a little bit of that. The original plague, so the original narrative, at least the most convincing I've seen, is that before Moses returns, he gets circumcised, and that's I've discussed that on the show. It's a weird case. The bridegroom of blood. God tries to kill him on the way there. Again, where's that scene? Where's the scene of God showing up and being like, I demand foreskins right now, or I'm
Yes.
going to kill you. And then Zipporah cuts off the tip of someone's penis and circumcises them and touches someone else's penis with it. It's so weird, and it's all tied to this narrative about firstborn. And God specifically says in that, like, I'm going to kill Pharaoh's firstborn. And then when Moses comes to um, comes to Pharaoh, because Moses' interactions with Pharaoh are much more like bureaucratic. He shows up
Mhm.
as a representative trying to resolve these issues. Um,
He's like a union rep going in with the
who
bosses.
clearly doesn't want to. He won't even talk. Aaron's the one who does all of the talking, which again, all this stuff gets smoothed over because we've got Christian Bale being like, "I am the God of blah blah blah," and screaming.
Yeah, yeah.
And in that encounter, he relays God's message, and Yahweh says, "I'm going to kill your firstborn." And so there's an argument to be made that originally it was only Pharaoh's firstborn was the only quote unquote plague of Egypt, and the rest of them were backfilled like as kind of a larger narrative, and addressing some of like Egyptian gods. There seems to have been like as time went on, like Herodotus's time, the Egyptians were a little bit more, a little less. The priests had gained a lot of power, especially in the
Mhm.
post-Ramesside era. The priests gained a lot of power, and they were very controlling. In the time period this is set, that it was kind of a live and let live thing. They didn't care about cultic matters as long as you paid your taxes, and like when you went to the right city, you worshiped their gods. That's how it was pretty much everywhere.
You paid a little respect.
Exactly. The Egyptians, though, eventually became, in kind of the Iron Age and post Iron Age Persian period, they became a lot more rigid around that. And so maybe it's reflecting kind of some of those sorts of things of like, this is what like the Egyptians are kind of dicks about their cultic matters. And so like here's us talking about how we ruined all of their cult. Like and Ramses, it won't let Moses go off to worship in the wilderness, and he won't let him go
Well,
do his sacrifices. Whereas like pharaohs back then wouldn't have actually like that's definitely an
it
anachronism.
would be more about the do you have any idea how economically problematic this is
Exactly.
going to be?
um
I mean, this is one of the things that I've, of course, learned mostly from your telling and explaining about how essential and important in these early writings and early justifications, how important it is to show definitively, my God can beat up your God.
it's so much of that is just my God can beat up your God. So yeah, that
And you have to say that the Exodus narrative, especially as it has come to us with these multiple plagues, really shows a pretty devastating deistic ownage
oh,
of Egypt at the
they
time.
really built it up. If it
I
started with
I don't know
just
how Egypt's going to recover from
yeah,
this one.
that's one of the funniest parts with like adding it to Ramses. Like people who want to make this, have this be real. Ramses' life after this point is awesome. Like he's one of the most successful pharaohs of all time. Like
It is very funny to imagine like this series of events happening to an ancient kingdom, and then we'll get to the final act of like your entire army being drowned in the Red Sea and coming back and being like, all right, well, it's going to be a bit of a rebuilding year, but I think
speed
we're going to
bumps.
come out of this.
Speed bumps,
Yeah, speed
folks.
bump.
We're doing a little reorganization. Let's get some synergy going between the different
Yeah.
departments.
All we need to do is replace every livestock animal in the entire kingdom for the next year before we all starve to death. But we're gonna be fine.
It's so eventually it does get to the plague of the firstborn, and that
Yeah.
is where like Ridley
I
Scott's
also, we do need to clip along. I do like the 5 minutes of this movie where every Egyptian character is just walking around with boils.
like the boils are pretty gnarly too. Like they're all
Yeah,
over there. They're like leaving giant scars on their
but it's just
faces.
like
These
it,
beautiful
it's
actors, like gorgeous people, done in makeup, and then just giant scars on their faces.
but it is just like 3 minutes of the movie where
Yeah.
they're not. It's not really commented on. It's like, yeah, now we've all got boils.
and then they just kind of got over that. It
Yeah,
was
then they go
fine.
over them. Yeah.
Eventually, so they do the plague of the firstborn. It's I think fairly appropriately done, like tastefully done, as much as you can tastefully do the slaughter of
Yeah, a
the
child
thousands of
genocide.
children, and
Yeah.
that's where like the central kind of argument between Moses and God of Moses he's not quite sure about being Osama bin Moses. He's not quite sure about this whole Mujahideen thing.
Yeah.
But God is really sure of it. And he like talks down to Moses like the Egyptians, they slaughtered you for hundreds of years, and I've been so
Yes.
patient with them and all of that. And it's very again, it feels like shower conversations of Ridley Scott having arguments of like, okay, but you killed all those children, you killed all
Yeah.
those babies.
And you can't help but, like, when it's put this bluntly, and again, out of the mouth of a petulant little child,
Yes.
you can't help but thinking about, current events a little bit more acutely, in this formulation of, you know, Hebrew theology.
Right. And I mean, I was
And why shouldn't I burn them all like a little kid with a magnifying glass in an anthill?
and like that's one of the interesting parts of like what would it take to make a really interesting Exodus adaptation. I don't think Scott is completely off on the whole like you got to have him be a terrorist thing. Like I think
Yes.
that's fine because the alternative is just like a big piece of Zionist propaganda. Like
Yes.
it would not fly very well if it was done. I think with justice, it would be triumph of the Moses sort of deal.
Yes.
You're like ooh, woo,
But even then, it's also like, and I doubt, current Israeli policy was on the very forefront of Ridley's mind.
no,
I think he just wanted to make a big epic here. But it
right.
is, even the kind of apologetic way that you could see this characterization of Moses of being like, ah, God, well, if you insist, I guess I have to kill them all.
I just got to do
I
it.
really don't want to, but I guess we got,
Yeah, and it's and even like the way and he does soften that a bit like the authors of the Exodus are just doing victory laps like just spitting
yeah,
on the Egyptians when the Hebrews leave in this they're like hissed at by the Egyptian citizens because all their children are dead and all this
yes,
happens when in the Exodus version Yahweh basically puts a magic spell on all of the Egyptians. So the Hebrew slaves go to their Egyptian neighbors and say, "Can I have your food and your stuff?" And they just say, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And they're like celebrating when they're leaving. They're like, "Yeah, they took all our stuff. They're going. Awesome, good stuff." And we're that wouldn't probably not engender any great feelings to have because again
yes.
that's very like my like you said my dad can beat up your dad sort of like he can put
Yes.
you under a spell where you'll just let us walk out with your house which again probably not the great the greatest thing to put in a modern movie so I can't
Yeah.
say that I fault them for changing that uh, and that leads us to kind of the grand set piece of them fleeing.
AKA, I can't believe there's still 40 minutes left
Oh
in this
my
movie.
god, and it's done in the most like they show you like okay, Moses goes back over the steps he took before and he takes the secret route that you're unsure of what the point of was earlier in the movie except to set up like you know that like
Yeah.
okay, he's going to take
It's
this
like,
route later.
even at this point, it's like, where this is happening. They do the Red Sea. The Red Sea's getting like we have one more big cinematic thing, but it's like, it's so process oriented where they have to show every single step at this late in the movie. And it's like, we've already done most of the theological wrangling.
Yeah.
Aaron Paul's really eating up screen time at this point,
Oh,
and I'm like, I don't know if I need to
he
see this
just
much Paul this late in the
man, he
movie.
just keeps showing up and you're like bummed that he's like in this. I'm like, man,
Because my wife and I just started rewatching Breaking Bad, and you know what? Paul's not the best actor in the world, but he's so delightful in Breaking Bad, especially like as you're just getting to learn that character.
he would have been such a
Uh,
good character actor if they didn't try to
yeah,
make him a
like this
movie
type of guy.
star. Yeah.
Yeah,
Where you're like, man, I don't know if they were setting up a sequel or whatever, but that would be one of the most unwatchable pieces of shit I've like, which is saying something because of, this movie. Uh,
well, I mean, I do think that there is maybe a funny thing that you could do with Aaron Paul. No, Aaron's the one who does the golden calf. This not
yes.
Aaron Paul, Aaron the
Aaron,
son.
Joshua is kind of off doing I don't remember what Joshua's not kind of there. Like he feels very inserted into the narrative where you're like, that's definitely a late addition because he plays very little part until they get to like invading the invading Palestine essentially. Like
Because maybe there's something funny you could do with almost like Moses wrestling with his dirtbag fail sons as they're trying to get the golden calf going while he's trying to set up a real pure Hebrew society.
Yeah.
You know, like that kind of
Again,
thing. Almost
like the scene of him and Miriam castigating Moses for taking a foreign wife
yeah,
is not in this movie, but there's that kind of like tension between the brothers that happens occasionally, and then it culminates in like the golden calf episode. Some of Aaron's sons get killed. Like
yeah,
that is all gone. Aaron is not a character in this movie. He's like in it for like a cameo appearance, basically.
yeah,
He doesn't speak for Moses. He doesn't really do anything. So they get to the scene, and it's like the 30th scene of Moses being mad at God for not showing up because now he's on the coast and he's not at the
yeah,
straits. He thought he was going to the straits and that he'd be at this like fairly narrow crossing, but no, he's doing the full Red Sea. And he's like frustrated. He's like, I can't believe that God took me out here to die. And that would hit harder if it hadn't happened like 30 times in the movie, and you
yes,
know where it's going to lead, and the Red Sea starts parting.
yes,
And this looks really good. Like I
yes.
thought it was very. If you saw this in
You
IMAX,
know,
it would have looked cool as fuck.
the tornadoes were a nice
They
touch.
were. The tornadoes were okay. It eventually.
You think that's overkill?
I don't.
I mean, at this point, I'm like, if you're gonna make me wait this long for
Yeah.
this thing, like have the lightning, have the water spout tornadoes, like the wall of
It
water,
looks good
like
usually. Like the tornadoes look cool until like it pulls back on the establishing shot as it's like calming down, and you're like, that looks like dog ass. And it's just like everything stays too long. This movie overstays its welcome in
yeah,
every conceivable way, which was just so frustrating. But
yeah,
there is a nugget with that, like the Red Sea crossing is probably a sea and river crossings are significant in ancient literature. You think of like Herodotus talking about Cyrus crossing whatever river is up. Like there's a river up near Afghanistan where it's like him crossing the natural boundaries of his empire. Caesar
mhm,
crossing the
the
Rubicon.
Rubicon,
Like that. Those sorts
yes,
of things were considered oftentimes like these natural boundaries because they were difficult to cross. It was expensive.
mhm,
You had to go to the right place. Like it was a significant thing in the ancient world. And so it created all of these theological and like philosophical discussions of like what natural boundaries are like. So that's where this starts to come from. There are a lot of discussions of like Moses when he goes to the land of Palestine, like the land of soon to be Israel, he's not allowed to cross the river. That's where he dies. And that's the same river that Elijah and Elisha cross on dry land. Like the same sort
mhm,
of thing happens. And my own feeling on this is that some of those older, and this is just vibes, I don't know that there's established who had the first like water crossing on dry land motif of God parting the waters, of Yahweh parting these
mhm,
waters. But I have this inkling that there's some Iron Age like thing about these prophets, Elijah and Elisha, because they liked those kinds of characters, Balaam
uh,
and all of that. I want to say that those are the origins of that specific motif that finds its like biggest expression in Moses crossing the biggest body of water possible. Because Moses is
right,
much like if those guys were near divinity, like those prophets, they could do miracle workers and all of that. Moses is essentially, I mean, he's called a god repeatedly throughout the text, and they had to do a lot of like maneuvering their like edits in the text to try and downplay that to say like no you can't worship this guy, do not do that. Like later editors really like there's old traditions, again as old as anything, of like Moses not dying. Moses doesn't necessarily die in the original tradition of Moses, like Enoch, like Elijah, and that's why he shows up with Jesus. Enoch doesn't get to, but like in the big theophany at the Transfiguration, the famous one, Moses
mhm,
and Elijah are there, which shouldn't be possible because they're dead and there's been no resurrection. So what I think the most plausible case is that the author of this passage is working from a tradition, whether he's like conscious of it or not, that Moses doesn't die. Like there are even like discussions in these legends around this time of like a demon and an angel fighting over his body. Like there's a lot of stuff
Okay.
that goes on around the death of Moses, and you see a lot of attempts to downplay Moses' divinity, which is, I think, really, really fascinating, but not in this
But
movie.
then you are left with this act of doing perhaps, the commanding one of the more supernatural feats that we see explicitly described in the entire text.
Right. And in this, like specifically, one of the things that they downplay is whether it's Moses who parts the Red Sea with his staff. That's where like they make clear later that it's God. It's God who's doing all of this, not Moses, not God through Moses. Like it's just God. Moses happens to raise his hand and the seas part.
I can see where you get into very much like things that need to be resolved in Christian traditions with like the Trinity and stuff through these things. Is like, is God acting through Moses? Is Moses commanding God? Well, that doesn't sound right because nobody commands
You
God.
can't. Yeah,
Is
exactly.
are they acting in accordance with one another?
And that, like, because people would rightly, I think, just kind of intuitively being like, they turn these cult figures into minor gods, like the saints, like like they have to like continually say, you're not allowed to worship that, you're not allowed to, like, the rabbis are like, don't worship the angels, even if the angel is like allowed to bear Yahweh's name, like Malak is, and you're not allowed to worship them, even though he may appear God. You can't do that.
Now, see, even to me, as I'm considering the ramifications here, is like, okay, well, why does God need Moses in general at all? Now, is it just purely to talk to the other people? Like, is he to pure, like, seriously, he just needs like a community organizer who can actually do the busy work of talking to all of these humans because God doesn't need to, you know, bow himself so low to talking to everybody individually?
And that's one of the things that Scott really tries to figure out. Like it seems to be his conversation, because they mentioned that, like, mentioned, Moses mentions that specifically in like an early conversation. He's like, well, why do you need me? And
Yeah.
I thought that was kind
I
of
mean, the
interesting.
argument seems to be mostly that that God needs a like temporal sword, essentially,
Yeah.
to like organize people to actually fight against other humans.
Yeah. And
But they, even then, in the same narrative, he's like, God gets impatient and is like, actually, I'm just going to kill every child
it's just like,
in the city. Time's
he's
wasting,
like, well,
Moses.
you wasted
Get on my
400
schedule.
years. Like, what's the
Yeah,
deal? Like, it does
yeah.
create this kind of like God with, I don't know, uh, BPD or something like that, like
Well,
bipolar.
again, that's why the depiction of having it be this little child is as you, what is the word you're using? Theophany,
Theophany.
the
Yeah. So
voice,
appearance of
theophany, the
God.
voice of
Sorry.
God. But it does really, it does, honestly, it resolves a lot of these questions when you make the characterization of God himself as a little pissy child, because it takes away a lot of the impulses to try to reason with this deity of like, oh, why now? Or why me? Or what do you need me to do when you can do anything? When you cut back to the kid being like, it has to be now. Make it happen now. You have to do it. I'm not going to do it. You know, it like when you make the voice a whiny little kid, you know, it does it corrects away a lot of these impulses to like try to rationalize God's will. But then again, you're left with a God that is an angry little child.
Yeah. And that, like, that's one of the weird things that doesn't resolve. Like, I thought, again, there's so much in this that could be really interesting and intriguing. And yet, like, the resolution to that is like, Moses is like, well, you saved us all. I'll write your laws down for you. And he's sitting there with like a chisel and like putting the stones,
Yes,
like,
exactly.
you're like,
It's
what?
very much like, you know, you're hanging at your homie's house, like finishing up your work for the day before you two grab a beer.
Yeah.
And that's after they do the nice send off of the kid, because there's another shot earlier where like Moses is, you know, traveling with the Hebrews and he kind of looks out of
Oh, that's the
the
very
little
end.
like
That's when
litter.
he's older, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He looks out of the litter
Yeah.
at the very end that he, or the whatever
Yeah.
wagon that he's being led in, and he looks back and he sees the kid looking back at him as the kid kind of disappears into the crowd. It's very much, speaking of Mad Max Fury Road, it's like the end of Fury Road when Max like
He's like,
disappears
gives
back
him the
into
nod
the
to
crowd. Yeah.
Furiosa.
Yeah,
it,
exactly.
it's crazy that this came out before Fury Road. It feels like
It's crazy that they were working on them at the same
oh,
time.
that's
I
you're
would say
right.
that Fury Road is a much more successful, like, religious parable than Exodus: Gods and Kings.
By far, there is much more spiritual depth to Mad Max Fury
Yes.
Road than to this, which again kind of fits. I don't know. George Miller, he was an ER doctor. He's seen the lows of like human
Yeah.
existence in like all of its gory detail, like cleaning up 1970s motorcycle victims. Like, ooh,
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so beautiful and cool about the Mad Max cycle is watching this guy move from wanting to make, like, a nasty little car action movie to being like, "No, I'm overtly and intentionally building, like, future mythologies of the future past," you know?
like he's basing it on this these cultural trends he sees of this like nihilism in Australian
Yeah.
life. You saw the same thing with like Peter Weir's The Cars That Ate Paris,
Yeah.
and there's just this, and that's what you got to do. You got to draw on that. Ridley Scott, what are you drawing on? Like your own frustration with the idea of God? Like,
Yeah, again, you watch this thing and like, you really feel like there's not too much passion here as much as Ridley just, like, looking at his schedule and being like, "What's a good story to do then? Exodus? Oh,
all
yeah,
right, what
we can film
let's
that."
talk about this. What would it take for me to be okay with the infanticide of of
Yeah.
okay, so it's ethnic oppression and slavery, and so he does like a little bit of lip service to that and talks about it, but it you can kind of tell his heart's not in it, um, which
Yeah.
is kind of a bummer. But yeah, so that kind of takes us to the end of this movie, this biblical epic.
Yeah.
What do we think about Exodus: Gods and Kings?
I mean, I've made it pretty like, it's visually okay at most points, and it has that Ridley competence, but it's just such a turgid experience to watch, and there's not enough commentary or friction between the source material and the telling of it to have something interesting jump out at you, nor is there um a compelling enough visually original, or dare I say even like psychedelic approach to some of what could be the cooler concepts of the Exodus story to give there much meat there. And so all you're left with is this kind of like bleak and depressing competence of the relating of this story, even while it's still not doing quite enough accurate justice to the Exodus story to be even like, oh, this is like the kind of retelling that you would put on at Bible camp or whatever. So, you know, you're left with something that is a whole lot of, unfortunately, nothing.
It's original in all of the wrong ways, I think.
Yeah.
Like the themes that it touches on. I mean, Cecil B. DeMille at the beginning of Ten Commandments like talks about like, oh, it's the story of the foundation of human rights and liberty and freedom from slavery and oppression and all of that. It's very
Yeah.
high-minded sort of thing. You don't get that here. You get like those themes that still exist, but he's always just kind of moving on to the next plot point in a way
Yeah.
that feels both way too slow and way too fast, and that's not a good place for your epic to be in.
Yeah, and again, it's like, even if you're taking it as a character study of, or a character story of like Moses, like stepping up to this thing, you really don't get a sense of like a moral revelation on Moses as much as again, as I said earlier, it seems like he's getting a new
Yeah.
boss, you know? And it's like I was taking orders from Pharaoh and now I'm taking orders from Yahweh. And my moral journey in it, I mean, I guess I get closer to the Hebrew people in general, but I don't see that much of that.
No. Yeah.
He's like a good soldier in this, which I
It
guess is like kind of what Hebrew God asks of you, is like, do as I say and don't question it, and that's your end of the bargain.
you can
And
almost
my end is like, I guess,
you can
protection.
almost imagine that if Russell Crowe was 10 years younger, Ridley Scott would have just put him in this because
Yeah.
it's very much that same Robin Hood. It is another Gladiator redux in a lot of ways of
Yeah.
like he can't stop making the same thing. But obviously Russell had put on a bunch of weight and was getting a bit older by this point, which I
Yeah.
I love, by the way. I think
Oh, yeah,
Russell Crowe's
we
big
love
guy
Ben Miller for
era
him.
is amazing. Um,
Yeah, I mean, you're right, where he's just it does feel a lot like him just trying to run the Gladiator playbook, but there's such a more interesting moral dimension and mythological dimension to this story that it feels like, Gladiator, even though they talk about gods and it like functions so much, and of course you see all the shots of him in the Elysian fields
yeah,
or whatever, but it works so much better as a like a secular story of political and personal intrigue of the time, and just trying to map that onto the details of Exodus without much consideration for the 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 religious implications and moral and spiritual and reality implications of what's going on in it becomes quite
yeah, he
boring.
doesn't want to deal with that. You
Yeah.
can tell he doesn't want to deal with that, and so he puts that onto the character, but it makes the rest of all of that stuff feel like it's shoehorned in from a different movie. It's like the
It,
movie's plot itself seems to be about like God showing up where he doesn't belong, sort of thing. Where you're,
yes, exactly. And the funny thing is even during this era, as we both said, like we both like Prometheus
yeah,
and also Covenant, which deals with like a lot of these things of the horror of understanding a force greater than your understanding of the world at work and finding yourself caught up in it and dealing with the senses, the shatterings of identity and the rebuildings of new identity through those experiences, which one would think you could fully play around with in this story. I mean, even me joking about it is like, when do you as Ramses make the final conclusion of, oh God, Hebrew God is real and I am being subjected to his punishment. What can I do to get out from under
yeah,
this? Like that in it is a
and
horrifying thing
and
to
he's
conceive of.
perfectly willing to eschew any like uh fidelity to the text, but he
Yeah.
still seems to be in the place of like one of the central issues is that in the text, God is the one who hardens Pharaoh's heart and repeatedly and doesn't let the Hebrews leave. He could have gone with
Mhm.
a different playbook with that. He just instead kind of doesn't mention it. Like God is both saying like I'm doing this to get Pharaoh to let you to leave, but then Pharaoh's still acting like he does in the biblical text of like he's being supernaturally forced into not letting them go until God is ready for that. And
for prick child God to prove a
and he could
point.
have done something with that. He could have made him
Yeah.
like more of a prick like that. He doesn't. Missed opportunities the movie.
In 2026 now, do you think there's still white space to do a compelling movie version of the Exodus
Yeah,
story?
I think you would have to have here's the thing. I think it's possible. I don't think it's likely with the way Hollywood production has been going and trending in that like
And I also do think that you would have to take some kind of commentary stance on, again, the current state of Israel to make something that didn't seem entirely tone deaf.
yeah.
And I don't see that actually happening with anybody as currently constituted. But I would like to see somebody
It was
try.
literally
Maybe like Ari Aster could do
oh
his incredibly nasty,
or
mean spirited version of the
or like
Exodus.
Robert Eggers, like his versions of these things,
Yes.
he's willing to let it not be modern morals, right? That was something in the
Yes.
Northman is that he lets the past be foreign and kind of alienating to a degree.
Yes.
And Scott, though,
And and can dwell in the unsettling implications and the unsettling realities of what the moral universe of the past might be like.
yeah, exactly. And Scott is not that, but he is also probably one of the only directors who could have gotten this movie made at that scale, which is
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
I guess,
really
yeah,
big
that's the
bummer.
thing is like he's like, yeah, write me the check. There's gonna be no commentary. I'm not gonna ruffle anybody's feathers. It's gonna be a straightforward retelling of in the most literal sense
It's going to be historically
possible.
accurate.
Yes, and the set design is going to be
Yeah.
immaculate.
So that's Exodus Gods and Kings, kind of a
Yeah.
rightly forgotten movie. It made like 250 million at the box office, which was a disappointment, but he comes in under budget, he comes in on schedule, he cranks them out. He will
He makes The Martian the next year, which is a big hit, and then continues to be off
continues
to the
to
races. Yeah.
do his Ridley Scott thing, and he will. I think he's described himself as like a shark, where he when he stops moving, he will die, and I
Yeah.
totally see that. I will say the end. The ending of this movie features the sort of send off to Tony Scott, who had just died.
Yes.
Um,
It's unfortunate that this is the one that gets dedicated to
Especially
Tony.
because Tony Scott, like, I know he didn't do this kind of movie, but his characterizations in a lot of his films are far more interesting to me than a lot of latter day Ridley. Like,
Mhm.
he could be a little bit, he could be often very formulaic in some ways, um, but there is something there where you're like, man, I wish we could have had a little bit more of that
Yeah. I will
pizzazz.
stand up in the final Ridleys. I said this earlier. I will stand up as long as we're talking about historical Ridleys for The Last Duel. I think that he actually taps into some interesting stuff there that where his, very workmanlike, well realized recreations of the past actually align with his story values there, and some really good
He
performances,
got something that wasn't
and a really
just like
compelling, yeah, story.
famous person from history gonna make a movie about it. Okay,
Yeah,
Napoleon, sure. The Gucci people, sure. It's like this is actually
yeah.
something, and it reminds me like this was one of the like I guess my last thing on Ridley Scott that my friend Theodorus mentioned is that um, he already made the perfect Napoleon movie in The Duelists, which
Mhm.
is a great movie about the Napoleonic Wars that Napoleon's not in, but it's about that. And it's really,
Yeah.
really beautiful and well made. And like, I just think back to like what could have early Ridley Scott have done with a biblical narrative? Because he probably wouldn't have done Moses. He would have done something else. But like,
That was the final question I was gonna ask is, eh, because I do need to wrap up
yeah, yeah.
soon. What what biblical story do you think, like, has been undersold or underdelivered, or should be touched on in a big Hollywood movie?
I think that there are a lot of them that could be interestingly done, like Jonah as a satire on this guy who sucks,
Yeah.
and it's very interesting in it how it talks about uh, political like basically he's just this obstinate guy and he's going to the Assyrians who are not remarked upon much in the Bible, but they're obviously the most vicious empire, one of the most vicious empires the world has ever seen, frankly. Like they
Mhm.
would not be matched. I mean, maybe Caesar's Gaul campaign, stuff like that, were really fucked up. But the scale of what he did, what they were doing at the time, and then you've got this story about Jonah as this guy who won't go and forgive them, and like at the and there's trippy parts to it, there's weirdness to it, like there's something there. I think a slow contemplative Job would probably be my favorite movie of all time. uh eh,
Yeah. Well, you could say that a lot of Coen Brothers movies are essentially Job
I
retellings of just, like, slow disasters happening to people for basically no
my
reason.
friend Simone has been who I'd like to have on the show at this point at some point. She has published, she's a grad student who's published about a serious man as reflecting some of the satirical elements that people often miss in Job, where it's very
Mhm.
much a satire of kind of like what happens when tragedy befalls you and the answers that people give you. Like when a loved one dies, people give you these kind of these answers of like, well, it was meant to happen, and all of his friends give him these specific answers that are and at the end God says, no, you're all fucking wrong, I'm God, you're not, that's the end of the story. And
Yeah.
it's
No,
very much
yeah, none of this has a
none of this
reason.
has a reason, you can't understand it if there was, and fuck you. And
Yeah.
basically
Fuck you for
and
trying,
Job is the
yes.
only one, because he brought this lawsuit against God. He's the only one who's basically praised by God at the end. And he's the one who said the most shit about him, like talked the most shit on him. And it's not even clear if Job repents. That's the one thing, is that some people think, oh, well, God says it because he repents. That's the Hebrew in Job is famously very difficult to understand. And that sentence in particular may actually be Job saying, no, I'm not going to repent in dust and ashes. I'm just going to sit here wallowing in them. That's an argument by the scholar Jacob Greenstein, and I'm really interested in that aspect. So that's
Yeah.
kind of my idea of like get someone with a really who's willing to do the go full again, like you were saying, like Seventh Seal, or like Tarkovsky, like Stalker type, willing to just bore people but have it be beautiful and contemplative and slow. That's the movie that's in my head where I'm like, that would fucking rule. So I better let you go now. Do not watch this movie. Do not watch this movie. And anything to plug before we head out?
No, not really. As I was saying before we started recording, I've been sitting on a number of exciting things that I can't wait to announce, but unfortunately the time is not quite right to announce them.
We'll have you back on when it's time to do that.
When I can actually plug some things, yes.
Talk about all the exciting things in the future of Chris Wade and Chapo Trap House. So,
yes,
thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. Always good to have you.
Thanks again for having me on. Thanks again for doing the podcast. Love the Bible Lore podcast.
Yeah. All right. Well, make sure to join the Patreon, patreon.com/Bible Lore podcast, and I will see you next time.